At exactly midnight, a passenger vanished from a locked train. No door had opened, no window was large enough to escape through. The only thing left behind was a note addressed to retired detective Elias Ward. You left him there. 17 years earlier, 11 people had died inside Blackridge Tunnel, and Elias had helped bury the truth. Trusted the uncomfortable feeling that arrived moments before something went wrong. It was never a voice or a vision, just a tightening beneath his ribs, as though his body noticed danger before his mind could name it. That instinct had protected him throughout his career as a police investigator, but on the cold November night he boarded the Northstar Sleeper, Elias tried to ignore it. He was 68, retired, and tired of seeing threats in every stranger's face. The overnight train would carry him from Edinburgh to London, where his daughter Claire had reluctantly agreed to meet him for breakfast. They had barely spoken in 2 years, and Elias knew this might be his final chance to repair what remained of their relationship. Rain hammered the station roof as he stepped aboard, carrying one leather bag and a lifetime of regrets he had never learned how to put down. The sleeper train appeared elegant from the outside, but its narrow corridors and dark wooden compartments belonged to another era. Brass lamps glowed weakly above faded carpets, and every movement of the train produced a groan from somewhere inside its metal frame. Elias passed several passengers while searching for his cabin. A nervous young man in an expensive gray suit stood near the lounge, repeatedly checking the corridor behind him. A woman with silver-streaked hair sat beside the window, reading an old newspaper article instead of a book. Near the dining carriage, a broad-shouldered attendant named Tomas polished glasses while quietly watching everyone who passed. The conductor, Louis Hale, inspected Elias's ticket and welcomed him with a smile that seemed carefully rehearsed. At the far end of the carriage sat an elegantly dressed woman wearing black gloves. She introduced herself as Celia Marsh, an art consultant traveling home after an auction. Her voice was pleasant, but her eyes remained cold and measuring. Elias entered his compartment and placed his bag beneath the bunk. The rain became heavier as the train pulled away from the station, swallowing the platform lights one by one. He poured water from the small bottle beside his bed and attempted to call Claire, but the signal disappeared before the call connected. He told himself he would try again later. As the city vanished behind them, the train gathered speed, cutting through miles of black countryside. Elias closed his eyes, but sleep would not come. Instead, he kept thinking about the man in the gray suit. The man had looked frightened, not nervous about traveling, but terrified that someone might find him. 20 minutes later, someone knocked rapidly on Elias's door. The man in the suit stood outside, breathing hard. Up close, he looked younger than Elias had first assumed, perhaps 35. Rainwater could not explain the sweat gathering along his forehead. He introduced himself as Adrian Pike and asked whether Elias had once worked for the police. Elias did not remember telling anyone about his career. Adrian claimed he had recognized him from an old newspaper photograph. Before Elias could question him further, Adrian glanced toward the lounge and lowered his voice. He said he had uncovered information about a case Elias investigated years earlier, a railway disaster inside Blackridge Tunnel. Elias felt the old pressure return beneath his ribs. Before Adrian could explain, footsteps approached. He stepped away from the doorway and whispered that they would speak in the dining carriage at midnight. Then he disappeared down the corridor. Elias closed the door, but the past had already entered the compartment with him. 17 years earlier, a passenger train had caught fire inside Blackridge Tunnel. 11 people died before rescuers reached the wreckage. Elias had led the criminal investigation, and the evidence eventually pointed toward a homeless mechanic named Silas Creed, who had supposedly entered a maintenance area and damaged an electrical control box. Silas insisted that faulty wiring and ignored safety warnings caused the fire, but no one believed him. He was convicted of sabotage and died in prison 5 years later. The railway company compensated the victims' families, the investigation was praised, and Elias received a promotion. Publicly, the case had been considered a success. Privately, Elias had never been able to forget the maintenance report that disappeared from the evidence room, or the senior officer who told him that reopening the investigation would destroy too many important people. At 11:45, Elias left his compartment and headed toward the dining carriage. The train swayed violently as the storm intensified. Lightning flashed beyond the windows, briefly revealing flooded fields and trees bending beneath the wind. Adrian was nowhere in sight. Tomas stood behind the counter, while the silver-haired woman sat alone at a table. She introduced herself as Mara Voss, a former history professor. When Elias mentioned Adrian, Mara's expression changed for less than a second. She claimed she had seen him walking toward the rear compartments. Before Elias could ask anything else, the train struck something on the tracks. Glasses toppled from tables, the lamps went dark, and passengers screamed as the carriage plunged into blackness. The emergency lights activated 20 seconds later. Adrian's chair lay on its side, and his unfinished drink had spilled across the table. A narrow trail of blood led from the carpet to the connecting door. Elias followed it into the corridor, but the blood ended beside an open window. Adrian had vanished. Lewis ordered everyone back to their compartments and insisted the missing passenger had probably panicked and moved elsewhere during the blackout. Elias knew better. The outer doors were electronically locked, the windows were too narrow for a grown man, and the train had been moving too quickly for anyone to jump without being killed. While examining Adrian's overturned chair, Elias found a folded piece of paper beneath it. 4 words had been typed across the center. "You left him there." Elias confronted Lewis privately, but the conductor denied knowing anything about the message. He explained that the storm had damaged a communication relay and blocked their contact with the driver. A landslide farther south had forced the train onto an older diversion track, meaning they would travel through isolated mountain territory for nearly an hour. Elias asked to inspect Adrian's compartment. Lewis initially refused, then reluctantly handed over a master key. Inside, the bed had not been touched. Adrian's suitcase contained clothing, a recorder, and several folders filled with documents about the Blackridge disaster. One photograph showed the burned train being removed from the tunnel. Another showed Silas Creed being led into court. At the bottom of the suitcase, Elias discovered a copy of the missing maintenance report. It warned that the tunnel's electrical system could ignite under heavy load. The report had been signed 6 weeks before the fire. Someone suddenly slammed the compartment door shut. Elias turned, but the corridor was empty when he opened it. A distant scream echoed from the dining carriage. He ran back and found shattered glass covering the floor. Tomas had disappeared, leaving only his blood-stained apron beside the counter. Celia Marsh stood near the wall, claiming she had entered seconds after hearing the crash. Mara remained seated, strangely calm. Lewis appeared moments later and demanded that Elias stop frightening the passengers with his investigation. Elias accused him of hiding something. Lewis responded by asking whether Elias truly wanted the truth, or merely wanted to control which version of it survived. Elias realized then that nearly everyone aboard knew more about Blackridge than they admitted. He gathered the remaining passengers in the lounge and began questioning them one by one. Mara finally revealed that her younger brother had died in the fire. Tomas was Silas Creed's son. Lewis's wife had been one of the trapped passengers who called him from inside the tunnel, moments before the smoke overcame her. Adrian was an investigative journalist who had spent 3 years reconstructing the case. They had selected Elias deliberately. The invitation from Claire, the discounted ticket, and even the train compartment had been arranged to place him aboard that night. Their plan was not to kill him. They intended to confront him with the evidence and record his confession before delivering everything to the authorities. The disappearances had been staged. Adrian was supposed to crawl through a service panel beneath the corridor, while Tomas used a concealed passage connecting the dining carriage to a storage compartment. The blood had come from medical bags. The storm and diversion had simply made the illusion more convincing. Elias was furious, but his anger faded when Mara explained that something had gone wrong. Adrian had never reached the storage compartment. Tomas had entered the hidden passage to search for him and had not returned. Someone aboard had turned their carefully planned confrontation into something real. Elias asked who else knew about the plan. Mara looked toward Celia. The elegant woman calmly removed one glove and placed it on the table. Her real name was Celia Harrow, daughter of the railway executive who controlled the Northstar Company during the Blackridge disaster. After her father's death, Celia had inherited his private records, including correspondence proving that executives knew the tunnel was unsafe. She claimed she had joined Mara's group because she wanted to correct her family's mistakes. Elias did not believe her. Adrian's notes showed that an unnamed executive had personally paid a police official to remove the maintenance report. The payment had not come from Celia's father. It had come from a private account controlled by Celia herself. The lights flickered again. When they returned, Celia was gone. Elias, Mara, and Louis searched the train while the remaining passengers locked themselves inside the lounge. Beneath the dining carriage, Elias found the open service panel. He climbed into the cramped passage and crawled through darkness until his hand touched Adrian's recorder. A few feet farther, he found Adrian lying unconscious with a deep wound along the side of his head. Tomas was beside him, barely breathing. Both men were alive. Someone had attacked them before they could complete the staged disappearance. Adrian regained consciousness long enough to say that Celia had taken his evidence and was heading toward the engine. The train accelerated. Louis attempted to contact the driver, but no one answered. When he examined the control panel, he discovered that the emergency communication system had been disabled. The diversion track curved through the mountains toward an unfinished bridge damaged by recent flooding. At their current speed, the train would reach it in less than 15 minutes. Celia did not intend to escape. She planned to destroy the train, its passengers, and every document connecting her to Blackridge. Another railway disaster would bury the truth beneath confusion, mechanical failure, and dead witnesses. Elias and Louis moved forward through the swaying carriages. Wind screamed through a broken window, scattering papers along the corridor. At the first-class compartment, Elias found Adrian's stolen folders burning inside a metal waste bin. He smothered the flames with a blanket and recovered several damaged pages. Mara discovered Celia's abandoned shoes beside the door leading to the locomotive. The connecting door had been locked from the opposite side. Louis explained that they could reach the engine by climbing onto the narrow exterior maintenance walkway, but the train's speed and the storm made the attempt nearly suicidal. Elias volunteered before Louis could object. He secured a safety cable around his waist and stepped outside. Rain struck his face like thrown gravel. The train leaned into each curve as he moved along the metal rail, gripping handles slick with water. Darkness rushed beneath him, broken only by flashes of lightning. Halfway across, The train jolted, tearing one hand loose. Elias swung against the side of the carriage, his boots scraping above the tracks. For several seconds, he hung over the black countryside. Lewis pulled on the cable, while Elias forced himself back onto the walkway. He reached the locomotive door and smashed its small window with the metal buckle from the safety strap. Inside, the driver was unconscious on the floor. Celia stood over the controls, holding a flare gun. She warned Elias not to come closer. She explained that the Blackridge fire had occurred during a crucial merger. If the maintenance failure had become public, the company would have collapsed. Thousands would have lost their jobs, and her family would have been ruined. 11 lives, she said, had been sacrificed to protect thousands more. Silas Creed had been chosen because no one important would defend him. Elias had understood the arrangement, even if he refused to admit it. Her words cut deeper because part of them was true. Elias had not accepted money, but he had accepted the promotion. He had seen inconsistencies in the evidence and allowed himself to stop asking questions. His silence had protected his career while an innocent man died in prison. Celia raised the flare gun and told him that they had both made choices. The only difference was that she possessed the courage to finish what she started. Elias stepped forward. Celia fired. The flare struck the wall beside him, showering the locomotive with sparks. Elias tackled her before she could reload. They crashed against the controls as the damaged bridge appeared through the windshield. Celia struck him with the metal flare gun, opening a wound above his eye. Elias fell to one knee. She reached for the throttle, but Mara entered through the shattered door and seized her arm. Celia shoved Mara into the wall. Lewis followed, wrestling Celia away as Elias dragged himself toward the emergency brake. The handle refused to move. Celia had jammed a steel tool beneath its base. The bridge grew closer. Elias pulled until his injured hands slipped. He thought of the victims inside Blackridge Tunnel, pressing against locked windows as smoke filled their lungs. He thought of Silas Creed, dying beneath the weight of a crime he had not committed. Most of all, he thought of Claire, who had spent years asking why her father always chose his work, his reputation, and his silence over the people who needed him. Elias wrapped both hands around the handle and pulled again. The steel tool snapped free. The emergency brakes engaged with a scream that shook the entire train. Carriages bucked against one another as sparks erupted beneath the wheels. Passengers were thrown from their seats. The train slid through rain and darkness, slowing but not stopping quickly enough. Elias could see the broken section of the bridge ahead, where floodwater raged through the valley. 50 yards remained, then 30, then 10. The locomotive stopped with its front wheels less than 6 feet from the missing track. For several moments, no one moved. The only sounds were the rain, the creaking train, and Celia's ragged breathing beneath Lewis's grip. Emergency crews arrived shortly before dawn. Adrian and Tomas were carried away on stretchers, but were expected to survive. Celia was arrested for attempted murder, obstruction, and her role in the original Blackridge conspiracy. The recovered documents were handed to investigators, along with Adrian's recordings and the remains of the maintenance report. Elias could have left before the police questioned him. No one had physically prevented him from walking away. Instead, he sat in the lounge and recorded a complete statement. He admitted that he had doubted the evidence against Silas Creed. He described the missing report, the pressure from senior officials, and the promotion he accepted after closing the case. He did not claim that he had been threatened. He did not blame the department or pretend he had been powerless. He had chosen comfort over truth, and an innocent man had paid the price. When Elias finally reached London, Claire was waiting beneath the station clock. She had seen reports about the train on the news and looked as though she had spent the entire night expecting someone to tell her he was dead. Elias approached slowly, uncertain whether to embrace her. Claire stared at the bandage above his eye and asked whether the police were going to charge him for what happened years ago. Elias said he did not know. He told her that whatever came next, he would accept it. Claire did not forgive him, not then. But she stepped forward and held him for several seconds before pulling away. As they left the station, Elias reached into his coat and discovered one final folded note. He expected another accusation, but the message was different. It had been handwritten by Mara before the journey began. The truth cannot return what was taken, but it can stop the lie from taking anything else. Elias read the sentence twice before folding the note and placing it back inside his pocket. Behind him, the Northstar Sleeper remained silent at the platform, its dark windows reflecting the first pale light of morning. For 17 years, Elias had believed the past was a train that had already left the station. He finally understood that it had never stopped following him. The only choice he had left was whether to keep running from it or turn around and face what was coming.
If you like this story, like, comment, and subscribe for more.